Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a discussion video, and today I want to talk about the Para 2. Now, this is a knife that has been so done to death that I'm almost a little hesitant to even make this video, but I'm putting it out there for a couple of reasons. Number one, I've had a few requests or a few questions lately about the Para 2, specifically in response to some videos I made where, like, I didn't put it at the very top of my most favorite knife of all time list. And I've had questions even in the past where, when I do my most carried knives, it nearly always makes the list, but the odd time it hasn't made the cut. And so I've had some people, say in comments or other places, what's the deal here? The Para 2, you love the Para 2. Why isn't it on this list, or why isn't it in this video? So I wanted to talk about the fact that I do still love the Para 2, and it's a fantastic knife. In fact, since this knife came out in 2010, very few other knives have really come to a place where they can be meaningfully compared. Like, this knife is truly a modern classic. It would belong easily on the list of, the most iconic knives out there. The Buck 110 would go on that list, no doubt, and the USMC and a few knives like that. But this knife would absolutely deserve a place there. And so this truly is a modern classic with good reason. So why is it? Why is it that this knife is so good, and why? Here's the other question that I want to touch on and sort of respond to some of the people who've asked. Despite the fact that I have tons and tons of knives, despite the fact that I have lots of options available, some of which I even like in general a little better than the Para 2, why do I still have this knife? Why do I still carry it pretty frequently? Why do I still recommend it? Why does it still end up in a lot of videos? And so there are a lot of questions like that, and I think there are a lot of reasons that this knife is still near the top of the heap in terms of really great EDC folders in 2021. All right. By the way, this knife is more than 10 years old, so it came out in 2010, and that's just a couple of years. I think it was about 2012 where I started paying really close attention to the knife world and to watching videos and wanting to get some decent knives for myself. And even, it was probably another year and a half after that, so maybe 2013, 2014, that I finally decided I really wanted to get my hands on a Para 2. And this was, imagine this, even 4 years later, yeah, maybe it was 3 years later, it might have been 2013, but 3 or 4 years later, you could still not just go to a store and buy one of these. You ended up having to go on waiting lists, and I'd sign up for the Blade HQ waiting list and a bunch of others, and you'd get the email, and if you didn't get to it right away, they would still be sold out. But there are a few reasons that, and so I think part of it is just, my love for this comes from back then. There's a nostalgia component. But even then, if it was just nostalgia, I could put this on a shelf and kind of look at it and enjoy it. But it's more than that. Okay, so I want to get into some of those reasons. And first of all, it just checks a lot of boxes. It strikes a really nice balance. So this is a general, in a very general sense, I find this knife highly versatile. All right, and I know that's not specific enough, and I'll get into exactly what I mean by that. But when I say versatile, I really like carrying a knife that I feel like whatever happens today, I'm probably going to be like, this knife can handle it. And while there are some really hard use applications where I might not want a Para 2, those are pretty rare, right? Most of the time, the tasks that I'm going to need a knife for, even if it's outdoor use, if I'm camping, hiking, something like that, I still regularly take this knife. And I still feel quite comfortable. I rarely, yes, there are some circumstances where I'm going to take this instead. All right. But most often I still feel fine with this because it's just very balanced, very versatile. So let's get into some of the specific boxes that it checks. First of all, this is a knife that cuts really well. So there's a combination of things happening here. So we've got a flat grind satin finish. Of course, you can get a DLC coated one. I have had one in the past. We've got a nice bit of belly all the way along. Fairly thin, but not crazy thin behind the edge. Now, the thinness behind the edge is sort of offset. Okay, this is actually a thicker knife behind the edge, which does contribute to its toughness, but it still cuts well because that thickness is offset by the fact that this is not a super thick, stocky blade, and you've got a flat grind and quite a bit of distal taper. So you put all of those things together, and you actually get a knife that, in cutting tests, performs quite. I mean, in cutting tasks, performs quite well. I said test because I was in my notes, I wrote in, hey, do a bit of cutting in this portion of the video. So we're going to do that in a second, but I just wanted to kind of throw out there that, there's a lot of versatility. If you're carving wood, if you're cutting apples, if you're, almost every application of a knife, there's one thing that I wouldn't find this useful for, and I'll talk about that in 1 second. But first, let me just throw in a hunk of cardboard and do a little cutting so you can see that I'm not kidding. Let's just cut this little edge off. And, there is really very little resistance here to the cutting task, right? Like it really does cut exceptionally well. And so if you want that out of a knife, which it's a knife, so I think most people would, the Para 2 is great, and it's highly versatile, right? If it's not cardboard, if this was, an apple, if it was a piece of wood, whatever the case may be, we've already kind of gone over this. The only place that I don't find this, the only time that I wouldn't want this is there are some tasks. Cutting up a squash is a good example, where it's such difficult cutting that you either want a fixed blade or a triad lock, right? But anything short of that, I'm completely happy using the Para 2. And that the place where it's not quite as good is, this is not the single strongest knife known to man. There are some knives that are stronger, and there are certain cases where you need that extra strength. All right, but this cuts well, and it has a lot of versatility. That's number one. Number two, the other box that this checks for me is the materials are good. S35VN, G10, that's what I like to see in a knife. Now, the price point on these for those materials, like, are there knives that you can beat it? Yes. Okay, something like this. This is one of those knives where I'll often recommend the American Lawman over this. But and so this can be had a little cheaper, and that's one of the reasons I might steer someone in this direction. Okay, is this as fidgety? Is this as fun? Definitely not. So there are definitely some points where the Para 2 beats this. All right, so good materials, good cutting performance, comfort, right? This is a really comfortable knife. Now, I get some comments every time I say this. I get some comments like, "Oh man, I just hate the Para 2. It's the least comfortable knife I've ever felt." And I really don't follow. Like, I don't know, maybe your hand is like just a particular shape or whatever the case may be, but I've done a ton of cutting with this knife. You can see I've used and carried this so much that the G10 is even wearing down, and it's G10 for crying out loud. And I just find this very, very comfortable. And I know that's not true of every single person out there, but in all the things that I've done with this knife, and it's been a lot, I have never felt like ergonomics was a problem. Are there more comfortable knives? Yeah, but you almost have to go to something like this to get more comfort, where it's fully rounded. Yeah, this is more comfortable, more hand filling. This is, of course, the 8010 from Cold Steel, but short of doing something like that, this is a really, really comfortable knife. It's got an enjoyable action. Now, this is not, from a user standpoint, this is not the most important factor, right? As long as the knife opens reliably, that's what really matters. But the fact that I can flick this and have some fun with it, that is really enjoyable. And the compression lock is fantastic on the Para 2. Now, I'll be the first to say the compression lock is not always well implemented, and there are some knives out there. The Spyderco Amalgam is a great example where it's a fairly poor use of the compression lock, especially the way that they implemented it in that knife. But the Para 2, the compression lock works so well and so enjoyably. And so, plus you've got washers here. The action on this is really, really enjoyable for a lot of reasons. Now, this one's older, and I do get a bit of lock stick there, but it's not so much that you can hear it snap. Listen, right? You can hear that bit of a pop. Focus. that bit of a pop when I disengage it. So there's a little bit of lock stick there, but not anything that bothers me in any sense. And then finally, it's easy to carry, right? This is pretty lightweight. And because of that, it's summertime now. If I'm wearing shorts or thin pants or even like jogging shorts or something, it's fine. I know some people would feel like it's too heavy for that application, but I find I carry this quite often in like workout pants or workout shorts and have no issues with it. So it cuts well, it's got good materials, it's comfortable, it's a fast, enjoyable action, and it's easy to carry. And so for all those reasons, this knife makes a lot of sense, even in the current year, 2021. Are there other knives that check all those boxes? Of course there are. Um, they aren't as common. Okay, there's not it's not every single knife out there. There are some other knives that I like just as much. The Amalgam is a good example, right? The Manix is a good example. So there are some other Spydercos that I like as much or even more, but the fact that I like those other knives doesn't mean that I dislike the Para 2. Finally, again, I've got to talk about the nostalgia here. Every time I look at this knife, it just makes me happy because this was such an iconic knife, and this was sort of this was formulaic, I think, for me in my growth in the hobby. Right, this was the single greatest thing in the cutlery world when I got into knives. And so the excitement that I had and the love that I had for the Para 2 was so strong. In fact, I've told this before, but I actually had about six, I think I got up to 6 or 7 different versions, right? I had the standard in S30V, I had a black blade in S30V, I had S35VN, I had a crew wear, I had 20CV. No, I didn't have 20CV. Sorry, guys. What else did I have? Oh, CTS XHP. That was a sprint that I had. Anyway, I had a bunch of sprints. I got like 6 or 7, and I had an idea at the time that I would get all of the sprint runs, and eventually kind of gave up on that and haven't gone back to it. But that's what that's kind of my history with the Para 2, and that certainly ties into it as well. So there you go, guys. That's why I still love the Para 2, even though I know it doesn't make every single one of my lists. I know I don't talk about it as my very favorite EDC knife, and that's because there are a few other things in my collection that overshadow this, but that does not diminish how great of a knife this is. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to use those channel sponsors. It really does help me out a lot. We'll talk to you later.